The idea of good is so-called only in the Republic, but there are traces of it in other dialogues of Plato. It is a scarce as well as an idea, and from this point of view may be compared with the creator of the Timaeus, who out of his goodness created all things. It corresponds to a certain extent with the modern conception of law of nature or of a final cause of both in one, and in this regard may be connected with the measure and symmetry of the syllabus. It is, it is represented in the symposium under the aspect of beauty, and, and is supposed to be attained there by stages of initiation, as here by regular gradations of knowledge. Viewed subjectively, it is the process of science and dialectic. This is the science which, according to Phaedrus, it is the true basis of rhetoric, which which alone which alone is able to distinguish the natures and classes of men and things, which divides a whole into the natural parts and unites the scattered parts into a natural organized whole, which defines the abstract essences of universal ideas of all things and connects them, which fixes the field of hypothesis and reaches the final cause or first principle of all, which regards the sciences in relation by to the idea of good. The idea, science, is the highest process of thought and may be described as the soul conversing with herself or holding communication with eternal truth and beauty, and in another form is the everlasting question and answer, the ceaseless interrogative of Socrates. The dialogues of Plato are themselves examples of the nature and method of dialectic. Viewed objectively, the idea of good is a part of cause which makes the whole without us correspond with the world within. Yet this world without us is still a world of ideas. With Plato, the investigation of nature is another department of knowledge, and in this he seeks to attain only probable conclusions. Timaeus. If we seek, if we ask whether the science of dialectic which Plato only half explains to us is more akin to logic or to metaphysics, the answer is that in the answer is that in his mind the two sciences are not as yet distinguished any more than the subjective and objective aspects of the world of and man, which German philosophy has revealed to us, nor has he determined whether his science or dialectic is addressed in motion concerned with the contemplation of solid being or with a process of development and evolution. Modern metaphysics may be described as the science of abstractions or the science of evolution of thought. Modern logic, when passing beyond the bounds of mere Aristotelian forms, may be defined as the science of method. The germ, the germ of both of them is contained in the Platonic dialectic. All metaphysicians have something in common with the ideas of Plato. All logicians have derived something from the method of Plato. The nearest approach in modern philosophy to the universal science of Plato is to be found in Hegelian succession of moments in the unity of idea. Plato and Hegel alike seem to have conceived the world as the correlation of abstractions, and not impossibly they would have understood one another better than any of the commentators understand them. Swift's voyage to Laputa, having a desire to see those Asians who were most renowned for wit and learning, I set apart one of purpose, a purpose that Homer and Aristotle may appear at the head of all the commentators, but these were so numerous that some hundreds were forced to attend in the court and outward rooms of the palace. I knew and could distinguish these two heroes at first sight, not only from the court, but from each other. Homer was the taller and comelier person of the two, wore very erect for one of his age, and his eyes were the most quick and piercing I ever beheld. Aristotle stooped much and made use of a staff. His features were meager, his hair lank and thin, and his voice hollow. I soon discovered that both of them were perfect strangers to the rest of the company, and had never seen or heard of them before. And I had a whisper from a ghost who shall be nameless that these commentators always kept in the most distant quarters from their principals in the lower world to a consciousness of shame and guilt because they had so horribly misinterpreted the meaning of these authors to posterity. I introduced Didymus and Eustachius to Homer and prevailed on him to treat them better than perhaps they deserved, for he soon found they wanted the genius to enter into the spirit of a poet. But Aristotle was out of patience of all patience with the account I gave him of Scotus and Ramus as I presented them to him, and he asked them whether the rest of the tribe were as great dunces as themselves. There is, however, a difference between them, for whereas Hegel is thinking of all the minds of men as one mind, which develops the stages of the idea in different countries or different times in the same country, which with Plato these gradations are regarded only as an order of thought of ideas. The history of the human mind had not yet dawned upon him. Many criticisms may be made on Plato's theory of education. While in some respects he unavoidably falls short of modern thinkers, in others he is in advance of them. He is opposed to the modes of education which we felt in his own time, but he can hardly be said to have discovered new ones. He does not see that education is relative to the characters of individuals. He only desires to impress the same form of the state on the mind of all. He has no he had no sufficient idea of the effect of literature on the formation of the mind, and greatly exaggerates that of mathematics. His aim is above all things to train the reasoning faculties, to implant in mind the spirit and power of abstraction, to explain and define general notions, and if possible to connect them. No wonder that in the vacancy of actual knowledge his followers, and in time even he himself, should have fallen away from the doctrine of the ideas and have returned to that branch of knowledge in which alone the relation of the one and may can be truly seen, the science of number. In his views, both of teaching and training, he might be styled in modern language a doctrinaire after the Spartan fashion. He would have his citizens cast in the one mold. He does not seem to consider that some degree of freedom, a little wholesome neglect, is necessary to strengthen and develop the character and to give play to the individual nature. His citizens would not have acquired that knowledge which in the vision of air is supposed to be gained by the pilgrims for their experience of evil. On the other hand, Plato is far in advance of modern philosophers and theologians when he teaches that education is to be continued through life and will begin again in another. He would never allow education of some kind to cease, although he was aware the, that the proverbial saying of Solon, "I go on learning many things," cannot be applied literally. He himself, ravished with the contemplation of the idea of God and delighting in solid geometry, he has no difficulty in imagining that a lifetime might be passed happily in such pursuits. We who know how many more men of business there are in the world than real students of thinkers, or thinkers are not equally sanguine. The education which he proposes for his citizens is really the idea of the philosopher of man of genius, interrupted, but only for a time by practical duties, a life not for the many but for the few.
Yet the thought of Plato may not be wholly incapable of application to our own times. Even if regarded as an ideal which can never be realized, it may have a great effect in elevating the characters of mankind and raising them above the routine of their ordinary occupation or profession. Is the best form under which we can conceive the whole of life. Nevertheless, the idea of Plato is not easily put into practice, for the education of afterlife is necessarily the education which each one gives himself. Men and women cannot be brought together in schools or colleges at 40 or 50 years of age, and if they could be a result and if they could the result would be disappointing. The distinction of men is what Plato could call the den for the whole of life, and with that they are content. Neither have they teachers neither have they teachers or advisors with whom they can take counsels in raper years. There is no schoolmaster abroad who will tell them of their faults, or inspire them with the higher sense of duty, or with the ambition of true success in life, nor Socrates who will convict them of ignorance, nor Christ, or follower of Christ, who will reproach them for sin. Hence, they have a difficulty in receiving the first element of improvement, which is knowledge. The hopes of youth no longer stir them; they rather wish to rest than to pursue high objects. A few only, who have come across great men and women or eminent teachers of religion and morality, have received a second life from them, and have lighted a candle on the fire of their genius. The want of energy is one of the main reasons why so few persons continue to improve in later years. They have not the will, and do not know the way. They never try an experiment, or look up a point of interest for themselves. They make no sacrifices for the sake of knowledge. Their minds, like their bodies, at a certain age become fixed. Genius has been defined as the power of taking pains, but hardly anyone keeps up his interest in knowledge throughout a whole life. The troubles of a family, the business of making money, the demands of a profession destroy the elasticity of the mind. The waxen tablet of the memory, which was once capable of receiving true thoughts and clear impressions, becomes hard and clouded. There is no room. There is not room for the accumulations of a long life yet. The student, as years advance, rather makes an exchange of knowledge than adds or restores. There is no pressing necessity to learn the stuff of classics or history of natural science, which was enough for a man at 25 is enough for him at 50. Neither is it easy to give a definite answer to anyone who asks how he is to improve. For self-education consists in 1,000 years commonplace in themselves, in learning to what we are by nature something of what we are not, and learning to see ourselves as others see us, in judging not by opinion, but the evidence of facts, in seeking out the society of superior minds, in the study of lives and writings of great men, in observation of the one character, and receiving kindly of the natural influence of different times of life, in any act of thought which is raised above the practice or opinions of mankind, in the pursuit of some new original inquiry, in any effort of mind which calls forth some latent power. If anyone is desirous of carrying out in the detail of Platon education of afterlife, some such counsels as the following may be offered to him: that he shall choose the branch of knowledge to which his own mind most distinctly inclines, and in which he takes the greatest delight, either one which seems to connect with his own daily employment, or perhaps furnishes the greatest contrast to it. He may study from the speculative side and profession or business in which he is practically engaged. He may make Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, Plato, Bacon the friends and companions of his life. He may find opportunities of hearing the living voice of great teacher. He may select for inquiry some point of history and some unexplained phenomena of nature at our day pass in such scientific or literary pursuits, which furnish as many facts as the memory can retain, and will give him pleasure not to be repented of. Timaeus. Only let him beware of being the slave of coaches, or of running after a will, or the wisp in his ignorance, or in his vanity, or attributing to himself the gift of a pot, or assuming the air of a philosopher. He should know the limits of his own powers. Better to build up the mind by slow additions, to keep on quietly from one thing to another, to gain insensibly new powers and new interests in knowledge, than to form vast schemes which are never destined to be realized. But perhaps, as Plato would say, this is part of another subject to, him, to though we may also defend our education by his embelled yet.
We remark with surprise that the progress of nations or the natural growth of institutions, which fail modern treatises on political philosophy, seem hardly ever to have attracted the attention of Plato and Aristotle. The ancients were familiar with the mutability of human affairs. They could moralize the ruins of the cities and fall of the empires. Plato's statesmen Sulpicius' letter to Cicero, but by them faith, faith and chance were deemed to be real powers, almost persons, and to have had a great share in political events. The voice of them, like Thucydides, believed that what had happened would be again, and that a tolerable idea of the future could be gathered from the past. Also, they had dreams of a golden age which existed upon a time and might still exist in some unknown land, or might return again in the remote future. But the regular growth of a state, enlightened by experience, progressing in knowledge, improving in the arts, of which the citizens were educated by the fulfillment of political duties, appears never to have come within the range of their hopes and aspirations. Such a state had never seen, had never been seen, and therefore could be conceived by them. The experience Aristotle metaplat, metaplatolus led them to conclude that there had been cycles of civilization in which the arts had been discovered and lost many times over, and cities had been overthrown and rebuilt again and again, and the luge and volcanoes and other natural convulsions had altered the face of the earth. Tradition told them of many destructions of mankind and of the perversion of remnant. The world began the world began after the deluge and was constructed out by the fragments of itself. Also, they were acquainted with the empires of unknown antiquity, like the Egyptian or Assyrian, but they had never seen them grow and could not imagine, and more than we can, the state of men which preceded them. They were puzzled they were puzzled and stricken by the Egyptian monuments, of which the forms, as Plato says, were a figure, but literally were 10,000 years old laws, and they contrast the antiquity of Egypt with their own short memories. The early legends of Hellas have no real connection with the later history. They are they are at a distance, and the intermediate region is concealed from view. There is no road or path which leads from one to the other. At the beginning of Greek history, in the vestibule of the temple, is seen standing first of all figure of the legislator, himself the interpreter of seven of God, the fundamental laws which he gives are not supposed to change with time and circumstances. The salvation of state is rather to depend on the inviolable maintenance of them. They were sanctioned by the authority of heaven, and we was deemed in pity to alter them. Desire The desire to maintain them unaltered seems to be the origin of what at first sight is the surprising to us the intolerability of Plato against innovators in religion or politics laws. Although with a happy inconsistency, he is also willing the laws of other countries should be studied and improvements in legislation privately communicated to the nocturnal council laws. The additions which were made to them in later ages in order to meet the increasing complexity of affairs were still ascribed by fiction to the original legislator, and the words of such enactments at Athens were disputed over as if they had been like the words of Solon himself. Plato hopes to preserve in a later generation the mind of the legislator. He would have his decisions remain within the lines which he has laid down for them. He would not harass them with minute regulations. He would have allowed some changes in the laws, but not changes which would affect the fundamental institutions of the state, such for example as would convert an aristocracy into democracy or a democracy into a popular form of government. Passing from speculations to facts, we observe that progress has been the exception rather than the law of human history, and therefore we are not surprised to find that the idea of progress is of modern rather than of ancient date, and like the idea of a philosophy or of history is not more than a century of too old. It seems to have arisen out of the impression left on the human mind by the growth of the Roman Empire and of the Christian Church, and to be due to the political and social improvements which they introduced into the world, and still more in our own century to the idealism of the first French Revolution and the triumph of American independence, and in yet greater degree to the vast material prosperity and growth of population in England and her colonies and in America. It is also to ascribe in a measure to the greater study of the philosophy of history. The optimistic temperament of such great writers has assisted the creation of it, while the opposite character has led the few to regard the future of the world as dark. The spectator of all time, of all existence, sees more of the increasing purpose which through the ages ran than formerly, but to the inhabitant of a small state of Hellas, the vision was necessarily limited by the vale in which he dwelt. There was no remote past on which his eye could rest, nor any future from which the veil was partly lifted up by the analogy of history. The narrowness of view, which to ourselves appears so singular, was to him natural, if not unavoidable. Through the relation of the Republic to the statesman and the laws, and the two other works of Plato, which directly treat of politics, see the introductions to the two latter. A few general points of comparison may be touched upon in this place. The first of the laws, the Republic, though probably written at intervals, yet speaking generally and judging by their indications of thought and style, may be reasonably ascribed to the middle period of Plato's life. The laws are certainly the work of his declining years, and some portions of them, at any rate, seem to have been written in extreme old age. The Republic is full of hope and aspiration. The laws bear the stamp of valor and disappointment. The one is finished work which received the last touches of the other. The other is perfectly executed and apparently unfinished. The one has the grace and beauty of youth, the other has lost their poetical form, but there is more of the severity and knowledge of life which is characteristic of old age. The more conspicuous defect of the laws is their failure of dramatic power, whereas the Republic is full of striking contrasts of ideas and oppositions of character. The laws may be said to have more than a third of a sermon. The Republic of a form, the one is more religious, the other more intellectual. Many theories of Plato, such as the doctrine of ideas, the government of the world by philosophers, are not found in the laws. The immortality of the soul is the first mentioned in X. in 12. The person of Socrates has altogether disappeared. The community of women and children is announced. The institution of common or public meals for women laws is for the first time introduced at Paul. This reminds in the laws the old enmity the reports were even traditionally in high flood terms. At the same time are peremptorily ordered out of the city if they are not willing to submit their forms to the censorship of the magistrates' rep. Though the work is in most respects inferior, there are a few passages in the laws, such as the order due to the soul, the evils of licentious of natural love, the whole of book 11 religion, the dishonesty of retail trade and big cash, which come more harm to us and contain more of what may redeem the modern element in Plato than almost anything in the Republic. The relation of two works to one another is very well given by Aristotle in the Politics from the side of the laws. The same, or nearly the same, objections apply to Plato's later work, the laws, and therefore we had better examine briefly the Constitution, which is the reign described in the Republic. Socrates has definitely settled in all a few questions only, such as the community of women and children, the community of the community of property, and the constitution of the state. The population is divided into two classes, one of husbandmen, and the other of warriors. From this latter is taken a third class of councillors and rulers of the state. But Socrates has not determined whether the husbandmen and artists are to have a share in the government and whether they too are to carry arms and share in military service or not. He certainly thinks that the women ought to share in the education of the guardians and to fight by the said. The remainder of the work is filled up with discussions foreign to the main subject and with discussions about the education of the guardians. In the laws, there is hardly anything but those. Not much is said about the Constitution. This, which he had intended to make more of the ordinary type, he gradually brings round to the order or ideal form, for with the exception of the community of women poverty, he supposed everything to be the same in both states. There is to be the same education. The citizens of both are to live free from service or several occupations, and there are to be common meals in both. The only difference is that the common meals are extended to women and the warriors number about 5,000, but in the Republic only 1,000. By Plato in the Laws, Book 5, from the side of the Republic, the first and the highest form of the state and of the government and of the law is that in which there prevails more widely the ancient saying that friends have all things in common, whether there is no or ever will be this communion of women and children and of property, in which the private and individual is altogether banished from life, and things which are by nature private, such as eyes and ears and hands, have become common, and all men express praise and blame, and feel joy and sorrow on the same occasions, and the laws unite the city of the utmost. Whether all this is possible or not, I say that no man, acting upon any other principle, will ever constitute a state more exalted in virtue, or truer or better than this, such a state, whether inhabited by gods or sons or of gods, will make them blessed who dwell therein, and therefore to this we are to look for the pattern of the state, to cling to this, and as far as possible to seek for one which is like this. The state which we have now in hand, when created, will be nearer to immortality and unity in the next degree, and after that, by the grace of God, we will complete the third one, and we will begin by speaking of the nature and origin of the second. The comparatively short work called the Statesman or Politicus in its style and manner is more akin to the laws, while in its idealism it rather resembles to the Republic. As far as we can judge by various indications of language and thought, it must be later than the one, and of course earlier than the other. In both the Republic and Statesman, a close connection is maintained between politics and dialectic. In Statesman, the inquiries into the principles of method and spared the discussions about politics. The comparative advantages of the rule of law and of persons are considered, and the decision given in favor of person are reasonable. But much may be said on the other side. Nor is the opposition necessary, for a person may rule by law, and law may be so applied to be the living voice of the legislator, as in the Republic there is a myth describing, however, not the future, but the former existence of mankind. The question is asked whether the state of innocence which is described in the myth, or a state like our own which possesses art and science and distinguishes good from evil, is the preferable condition of man. To this question of the comparative happiness of civilized and primitive life, which was often discussed in the last century and in our own, no answer is given. The statesman, though less perfect in style than the Republic and of far less range, may justly be regarded as one the greatest of Plato's dialogue. Others, as well as Plato, have chosen an ideal republic to be the vehicle of thoughts which they could not definitely express, or which went beyond their own age. The classical writing which approaches most nearly to the Republic of Plato is the Republica of Cicero, but neither in this nor in any other of his dialogues does he rival the art of Plato. The mendax of Clancy and inferior, the hand of rhetorician is apparent at every turn. Yet noble sentiments are constantly recurring, the true note of Roman patriotism. We Romans are a good people, resounds to the whole world. Like Socrates, Cicero turns away from the phenomena of the heavens to civil and political life. He would rather not discuss the two suns of which all Rome was taking, when he can converse about the two nations in one, which had divided Rome ever since the day of Gracie. Like Socrates again, speaking in the person of Scipio, he is afraid lest he should assume too much the character of a teacher, rather than of an equal who is discussing among friends the two sides of a question. He would confine the terms king or state to the rule of reason and justice, and he will not concede the title either to a democracy or a monarchy. But under the rule of reason and justice, he is willing to include the natural superior ruling over the natural inferior, which he compares to the soul ruling over the body. He prefers a mixture of forms of government than a single one. The two portraits of the just and the unjust, which occur in the second book of the Republic, are transferred to the state Philus, one of the interlocutors maintaining against his will the necessity of injustice as a principle of government, while the other, Laelius, supports the opposite thesis. His views of language and number are derived from Plato. Like him, he denounces the drama. He also declares that if this life were to be twice as long, he would have no time to read the lyric poets. The picture of democracy is translated by him word for word too, though he had hardly shown himself able to carry the jest of Plato. He converts into a stately sentence the humorous fancy about the animals who were so imbued with the spirit of democracy that they make the passers-by get out of their way. His description of the tyrant is imitated from Plato, but in a fair inferior. The second book is historical and claims for the Roman constitution, which is to him the ideal of foundation of fact such as Plato probably intended to have given to the Republic in the Critias. His most remarkable imitation of Plato is the adaptation of the vision of air, which converted by Cicero into the Somnium Scipionis. He has romanized the myth of the Republic, adding an argument for the immortality of the soul taken from the Phaedrus and some other tortures derived from the Phaedo and the Timaeus. Though a beautiful tale and containing splendid passages, the Somnium Scipionis is inferior to the vision of air. It is only a dream, and hardly allows the reader to suppose that the writer believes in his own creation. Whether his dialogues were framed on the model of the lost dialogues of Plato of Aristotle, as he himself tells us, or of Plato, to which they bear many superficial resemblances. He is still the Roman orator. He is not conversing, but making speeches, and is never able to mold the intractable Latin to the grace of east of the Greek Platonic dialogue. But if he is defective in form, much more is he inferior to the Greek in matter. He nowhere, in his philosophical writings, lives upon arguments the impression of an original thinker. Plato's Republic has been said to be a church and not a state, and such an ideal of city in the heavens has always hovered over the Christian world and is embodied in Saint Augustine's De Civitate Dei, which is suggested by the decay and fall of the Roman Empire, much in the same manner in which we may imagine the Republic of Plato to have been influenced by the decline of Greek politics in the writer's own age. The difference is that in the time of Plato, the degeneracy to certain was gradual and insensible, whereas the taking of Rome by the Goths stirred like an earthquake the age of Saint Augustine. Men were inclined to believe that the overthrow of the city was to be ascribed to anger felt by the old Roman deities at the neglect of their worship. Saint Augustine maintains the opposite thesis. He argues that the destruction of the Roman Empire is due not to the rise of Christianity, but to the vices of paganism. He wanders over Roman history and over Greek philosophy and mythology, and finds everywhere crime, impiety, and falsehood. He compares the worst parts of the Gentile religions with the best elements of the faith of Christ. He shows noting the spirit which led the early Christian fathers to recognize in the writings of the Greek philosophers the power of the divine truth. He entrenches the parallel of the kingdom of God, that is, the history of the Jews contained in the scriptures, and of the kingdom of the world, which are found in Gentile writers, and pursues them both into an ideal truth, in the ideal future. It need hardly be remarked that his use both of Greek and of Roman historians, and of the sacred writings and of the church is wholly uncritical. The hidden mythology, the Sibylline oracles, the myths of Plato, the dreams of Neoplatonists are equally regarded by him as matter of fact. He marks acknowledged to be a strictly polemical or controversial writer who makes the best of everything on one side and the worst of everything on the other. He has no sympathy with the old Roman life as Plato has with Greek life, nor has he any idea of the ecclesiastical kingdom, which was to rise out of the ruins of the Roman Empire. He is not blind to the facts of the Christian Church and looks forward to a time when Christian and pagan shall be alike brought before the judgment seat, and the true city of God shall appear. The work of Saint Augustine is a curious repertory of antiquarian learning and quotations deeply penetrated with Christian ethics, but showing little power of reasoning and the slender knowledge of the Greek literature and language. He was a great genius, a noble character, yet hardly capable of feeling or understanding anything external to his own theology. Of all the ancient philosophers, he is more attracted by Plato, though he is very slightly acquainted with his writings. It is inclined to believe that the idea of creation in the Timaeus is derived from the narrative in Genesis, and he is strangely taken with the coincidence of Plato saying that the philosopher is the lover of God, and the words of the book of Exodus, in which God reveals himself to Moses exalt. He dwells at length of miracles performed in his own day, of which the evidence is regarded by him as irresistible. He speaks in a very interesting manner of the beauty and utility of nature and of the human frame, which he conceives to afford the foretaste of heavenly state of the resurrection of the body. The book is not really what to most persons the title of it would imply and belongs to an age which has passed away, but it contains many fine passages and thoughts which are for all time. The short treatise, the Monarchia of Dante, is by the far of the is by far the most remarkable of medieval ideas and bears the impress of the great genius in whom Italy and Middle Ages are so vividly reflected. Is the vision of universal empire which is supported to be natural necessity governor of the world, having a divine authority distinct from the papacy, yet coextensive with it. It is not the ghost of the dead Roman Empire sitting crowned upon the grave thereof, but the legitimate heir and successor of it, justified by the ancient virtues of the Romans and beneficence of the rule. The right to be the governors of the world is also confirmed by the testimony of miracles and acknowledged by Saint Paul when he appealed to Caesar, and even more emphatically by Christ himself, who, who could not have made atonement for the sins of men if he had not been condemned by divinely authorized tribunal. The necessity for the establishment of a universal empire is proved partly by a priori arguments such as the unity of God and the unity of the family of nations, partly by perversions of scripture and history, by false analogies of nature, based on implied quotations from the classics, and by all scribes and commonplace of logic, showing a familiar but by no means exact knowledge of Aristotle or Plato, there is none. But a more convincing argument still is the miserable state of the world, which he touchingly describes. He sees no hope of happiness, of peace for mankind until all nations of the earth are comprehended in the single empire. The whole treatise shows how deeply the idea of the Roman Empire was fixed in the minds of his contemporaries. Not much argument was needed to maintain the truth of a theory which to his own contemporaries seemed so natural and congenial. He speaks, or rather preaches, from the point of view not of the ecclesiastic but of the layman, although, as a good Catholic, he is willing to acknowledge that in certain respects the empire must submit to the church. The beginning and end of all his noble reflections and of his arguments, good and bad, is the aspiration that in this little plot of earth belonging to mortal man life may pass in freedom and peace, so inextricably in his vision of the future bound up to the beliefs and circumstances of his own age. The Utopia of Sir Thomas More is a surprising monument of his genius and shows a reach of thought far beyond his contemporaries. The book was written by him at the age of 34 or 35 and is full of the generous sentiments of youth. He brings the light of Plato to bear upon the miserable state of his own country, living not long after the wars of the Roses and in the dregs of the Catholic Church in England. He is indignant at the corruption of the clergy, at the luxury of the nobility and gentry, at the sufferings of the poor, at the calamities caused by war. To the eye of more, to the earth of moral, the whole world was in dissolution and decay, and side by side with the misery and oppression which he has described in the first book of the Utopia, he places in the second book the ideal state which by the help of Plato he had constructed. The times were full of steel and intellectual interest. The distant murmur of the Reformation was beginning to be heard. To minds like Morris, Greek literature was a revelation. There had arisen an art of interpretation, and the New Testament was beginning to be understood as it had been never as it had never been before, and has not often been since, in its natural sense. The life there depicted appeared to him wholly unlike that of Christian commonwealths, in which he saw nothing but a certain conspiracy of rich men procuring their own commodities under the name and title of the Commonwealth. He thought that Christ, like Plato, instituted all things common, for which reason he tells us the citizens of Utopia were the more willing to receive his doctrines. Howbeit, I think this was no small help of inference in the matter that they heard us say that Christ instituted among his and all things common, and that the same community does remain in the righteous Christian community's utopia. The community of property is a fixed idea with him, though he is aware of the arguments which may be urged on the other side. These things I say, I consider with myself, I hold well with Plato, and do not think marvel that he would make laws for them that refuse those laws, whereby all men should have and enjoy equal portions of riches and commodities. For the wise man did easily foresee this to be the one and only way to the wealth of a community, if equality of all things should be brought in and established utopia. We wonder we wonder how in the reign of Henry the VIII, through veil in another language and published in a foreign country, such speculations could have been endured. He is gifted with far greater dramatic invention than anyone who succeeded him, with the exception of Sweet. In the art of winning, he is a worthy disciple of Plato. Like him, starting from a small portion of fact, he founds his tale with admirable skill on a few lines in the Latin narrative of the voyages of Amerigo Vespucci. He is very precise about dates and facts, and has the power of making us believe that the narrator of the tale must have been an eyewitness. We are fairly puzzled by his manner of mixing up real and imaginary persons. His boy John Clement and Peter Gills, citizen of Antwerp, with whom he disputes about the precise words which are supposed to have been used by the imaginary Portuguese traveller Rafael Hituldi. I have the more cause, says Hituldi, to fear that my words shall not be believed, for I don't know how difficult and highly I myself would have believed another man telling the same, if I had not myself seen it, if I had not myself seen it with mine own eyes. Or again, if you had been with me in Utopia, and had presently seen the patience and loss as I did, which lived there 5 years and more, and would never have come thence, but only to make the new land known here, etc. Morelli regrets that he forgot to ask Hitler in what part of the world Utopia is situated. He would have spent no small sum of money rather than it should have escaped him. And he begs Plato Gilles to see Hitler or write to him and obtain answer to the question. After this, we are not surprised to hear that a professor of divinity, perhaps a late famous vicar of Croydon in Surrey, the translator thinks is the serious of being sent thither as a missionary by the high bishop. Yea, and that he may himself be made bishop of Utopia, noting, noting doubting that he must obtain the bishopric with seat, and he contended that a godly seat which proceeded not of the desire of honor and lucre, but only of a godly zeal. The design may have led to the disappearance of Hitler, concerning whom we have very uncertain news after his departure. There is no doubt, however, that he had told More and Gilles the exact situation of the island, but unfortunately at the same moment, Morris' attention, he is reminded in a letter from Gilles was drawn off by the servant, and no one and one of the company from a court and shipboard caught so loud as to prevent Gilles from hearing, and the secret has perished with him. To this day, the place of Utopia remains unknown. The words of Phaedrus or Socrates, you can easily invent Egyptians or anything, are recalled to our mind as we read this lifelike fiction. Yet, the greater merit of the work is not the admirable art, but the originality of thought. More is as free as Plato from the prejudices of his age, and far more tolerant. The Utopians do not allow him who believes not in immortality of the soul to share in the administration of the state laws. However, they put him to no punishment because they be persuaded that it is in no man's power to believe what he lists, and no man is to be blamed for reasoning in so much of his own religion. One of our company in my presence was sharply punished. He, as soon as he was baptized, began against our wills with more earnest affection than wisdom to reason of Christ's religion, and began to wax so hot in his matter that he did not only prefer our religion before all other, but also did despise and condemn all other, calling them profane, and the followers of them weak and devilish, and the children of everlasting damnation. When he had thus long reasoned the matter, they laid hold on him, accused him, and condemned him into exile, not as a despiser of religion, but as a seditious person and a raiser up of dissension among the people. In the public services, no prayers be used, but such as every man may boldly pronounce without giving offense to any sect. He says significantly, there be that give worship to a man that was once of excellent virtue or of famous glory, not only as God, but also the chiefest and highest God. But the most and the wisest part, rejecting all this, believe that there is a certain godly power unknown, far above the capacity and reach of man's wit, dispersed throughout all the world, not in bigness, but in virtue and power. Him they call the Father of all. To him alone they attribute the beginnings, the increasings, the proceedings, the changes, and the ends of all things. Neither give they any divine honors to any other than him. So far was more so far was More for sharing from seeing the popular beliefs of his time. Yet at the end he reminds us that he does not in all respects agree with the customs and opinions of the utopians which he describes, and we should let him have the benefit of this saying clause, and not greatly withdraw the veil behind which he has been pleased to conceal himself. nor is he less in advance of popular opinion in his political and moral speculations. He would like to bring military glory into concept. He would set all sorts of idle people to profitable occupation, including in the same class priests, women, noblemen, gentlemen, and sturdy and valiant beggars, that the labor of all may be reduced to 6 hours a day. He disliked of capital punishment and plans for the reformation of the offenders. His detestation of priests and lawyers compared his satirical observation. They, the Ethiopians, have priests of exceeding holiness, and therefore very few his remark that although everyone may hear of ravenous dogs and wolves and cruel man-eaters, it is not easy to find states that are well and wisely governed, are curiously at variance with the notions of his age and indeed with his own life. There are many points in which he shows a modern feeling and a prophet insight like Plato. He is a sanitary reformer. He maintains that civilized states have a right to the soil of waste countries. He is inclined to the opinion which places happiness in virtuous pleasures, but therein, as he thinks, not disagreeing for those other philosophers who define virtue to be a life according to nature. He extends the idea of happiness so as to include the happiness of others, and he argues ingeniously. All men agree that we ought to make others happy, but if others, how much more ourselves? And still he thinks that there may be a more excellent way, but to this no man's reason can attain unless heaven should inspire him with a higher truth. His ceremonies before marriage, his human proposal that was to be carried on by assassinating the leaders of the enemy, may be compared to some of the paradoxes of Plato. He has a charming fancy, like the affinities of Greeks and barbarians in the Timaeus, that the Utopians learn the language of the Greeks with the more readiness because they were originally of the same race with them. He is penetrated with the spirit of Plato, and quotes or adapts many thoughts both from the Republic and from the Timaeus. He prefers public duties to private, and is somewhat impatient of the importunity of relations. His citizens have no simple god of their own, but are ready enough to pay them to their mercenaries. There is nothing of which he is more contemptuous than the love of money. Gold is used for fetters of criminals, and diamonds and pearls for children's necklaces. When the ambassadors came arrayed in gold and peacock's feathers to the eyes of all the Ethiopians, except very few which had been in other countries for some reasonable cause, all that gorgeousness of apparel seemed shameful and reproachful in some is so much that they most reverently salute of the viles, the vilest and most abject of them were lords passing over the ambassadors themselves without any honor, judging them by their wearing of golden chains to be born men. You should have you should have seen children also had cast away the pearls and precious stones when they saw sticking the like sticking upon the ambassadors' caps, dig and push their mothers under the sides, saying thus to them, "Look, to he were little child still." But the mother, yea, and that also in good earnest, "Peace, son," said he, "I think he be some of the ambassador's fools." Like Plato, he is full of satirical reflections of governments and princes on the state of the world and of knowledge. The hero of his discourse, his theology, is very unwilling to become a minister of state, considering that he would lose his independence and his advice would never be heeded. Compare an exquisite passage, of which the conclusion is as follows: "And verily it is naturally given, Socrates," and ended. Here it echoes the new logic of his time. The utopians could never be made to understand the doctrine of second intentions, for they have not devised one of all those rules of restrictions, amplifications, and suppositions, very witty invented in the small logicals, which were our children in every place to learn. Furthermore, they were never yet able to find out the second intentions, insomuch that no one of them or that no one of them all could ever sin man himself in common, as they call him, though he be, as you know, bigger than was ever any giant, yea, and pointed to of us if even with our finger. He is very severe on the spoils of the gentry, the utopians, good hunting the lowest, the vilest, and the most abject party of butchery. He quotes the words of the Republic in which the philosopher described standing out of the way under a wall with the, until the driven storm of sleet and rain be overpassed, which admit of a single application to Morris on faith. Although writing 20 years before about the year 1514, he can hardly be supposed to have foreseen this. There is no touch of satire which strikes deeper than his quiet remark that the greater part of the precepts of Christ are more the variants with the lives of ordinary Christians than the discourse of utopia, and yet the most part of them is more dissident for the manners of the world nowadays than my communication was. But preachers, sly and wily men, following your counsel, as I suppose, because they saw men ill willing to frame their manners to Christ's rule. They have rested and right his doctrine, and right a rule of late have applied it to men's manners, that by some means at the least thing they might agree together. The New Atlantis is only a fragment, and very married to the utopia. The work is full ingenuity, but wanting in creating fancy, and by no means impresses the reader with sense of credibility. In some places, Lord Bacon is characteristically different from Sir Thomas More, as for example in the external state which he attributes the governor of Solomon's house, who dresses who dress who dress immediately describes, while to Sir Thomas More such trappings appear simple ridiculous. Yet after this program of dress, Bacon adds the beautiful trait that he had a look thought he pitied man. Several things are borrowed by him from the Timaeus, but he had enjoyed the unity of style by adding thoughts and passages which are taken for the Hebrew scriptures. The City of the Sun, written by Campanella, 1568 until 1639, a Dominican friar. Several years after the New Atlantis of Bacon has many resemblances to the Republic of Plato. The citizens have wives and children in common. Their marriages are of the same temporary sort and are arranged by the magistrates from time to time. They do not, however, adopt his system of lots, but bring together the best natures, male and female, according to philosophical rules. The infants until 2 years of age are brought up by their mothers in public temples, and since individuals for the most part educate their children badly, at the beginning of the 3rd year they are committed to the care of the state and are taught at first not out of books but from paintings of all kinds, which are emblazoned on the walls of the city. The city has 6 interior circuits of walls and an outer wall which is the 7th. On this outer wall are painted the figures of legislators and philosophers, and on each of the interior walls are the symbols or forms of someone of the sciences are delineated. The women are, for the most part, trained like the men in warlike and other exercises, but they have two special occupations of their own. After a battle, they and the boys shoot and relieve the wounded warriors. Also, they encourage them with embraces and pleasant words. Some elements of the Christian or Catholic religion are preserved among them. The life of the apostles is really admired by these people because they had all things in common, and the short prayer which Jesus Christ taught men is used in their worship. It is a duty of the chief magistrates to pardon sins, and therefore the whole people make secret confession of them to their magistrates, and they to the chief with a sort of rhetor metaphysicus, and by this means he is well informed of all that is going on in the minds of men. After confession, absolution is granted to the citizens collectively, but no one is mentioned by name. There also exists among them a practice of perpetual prayer performed by a succession of priests who change every hour. The religion is a worship of God in Trinity, that is wisdom, love, and power, but without any distinction of persons. They behold in the Son of the reflection of His glory, mere graven images they reject, refusing to all under the tyranny of idolatry. Many details are given about the customs of eating and drinking, about their mode of dressing, their employments, their works. Campanella looks forward to a new mode of education, which is to be a study of nature and not of Aristotle. He would not have his citizens waste their time in the consideration of what he calls the dead science of things. He remarks that he who knows one science only, he does not really know that one any more than the rest, and insists strongly on the necessity of a variety of knowledge. More scholars are turned out in the city of the sun in 1 year than by contemporary methods in 10 or 15. He evidently believes, like Bacon, that henceforward natural science will play a great part in education, a hope which seems hardly to have been realized either in our own or in any former age. At any rate, the fulfillment of it has been long deferred. There is a good deal of ingenuity and even originality in this work, and a most enlightened spirit pervades it, but it has little or no charm of style, and falls very far short of the New Atlantis of Bacon, and still more the Utopia of Sir Thomas More. It is full of inconsistencies, and though borrowed from Plato, shows but a superficial acquaintance with his writings. It is a work such as one might expect to have been written by a philosopher and man of genius who was also friar, and who had spent 27 years of his life in the prison of the Inquisition. The most interesting feature of the book, common to Plato and Sir Thomas More, is the deep feeling which is shown by the writer of the misery and ignorance prevailing among the lower classes in his own time. Campanella takes note of Aristotle's answer to Plato's community of property, that in a society where all things are common, no individual would have motive to work. Aristotle, he replies that his citizens being happy and contented in themselves, they are required to work only 4 hours a day, will have greater regard for their fellows than exists among men at present. He thinks like Plato. If he abolishes private feelings and interests, a great public feeling will take their place. Other writings on island states, such as the Oceana of Harrington, in which the Lord Archon, meaning Cromwell, is described not as he was but as he ought to have been, or the Argonies of Barclay, which is an historical allegory of his own time, are too unlike Plato to be worth mentioning. More interesting than either of these, and far more Platon in style and thought, is Sir John Eliot's Monarchy of Man, in which the prisoner of the Tower, no longer noble, no longer able to be politician in the land of his birth, turns away from politics to view that other city which is within him, and finds on the very threshold on the grave that the secret of human happiness is the master of self. The change of government in the time of the English Commonwealth set men thinking about first principles and gave rise to many works of this class. The great original genius of Swift owes nothing to Plato, nor is there any trace in the conversation or in the works of Dr. Johnson of any acquaintance of his writings. He probably would have refuted Plato without reading him in the same fashion in which he supposed himself to have refuted Bishop Berkeley's theory of the non-existence of matter. If we accept the so-called English Platonists, or rather Neo-Platonists, would never understood the master and the writings of Coleridge, who was to some extent a kindred spirit. Plato has no left permanent impression on English literature and conduct are affected by ideals in the same way that they are affected by the samples of eminent men. Neither the one nor the other are immediately applicable to practice, but there is a virtue flowing from them which tends to raise individuals above the common routine of society of trade, and to elevate states above the mere interest of commerce or the necessities of the self-defense. Like the ideas of art, they are partly framed by the omission of particulars that require to be viewed at a certain distance, and are apt to fade away if we attempt to approach them. They gain an imaginary distinctness when embodied in the state or in the system of philosophy, but they still remain the visions of a world unrealized. Most striking and obvious to the ordinary mind are the examples of great men who have served their own generation and remembered in another, even in our own family circle. There may have been someone, a woman, or even a child, in whose ways are shown forth a goodness more than human. The idea then approaches nearer to us, and we only cling to it. The idea of the past, whether of our own past lives of former states of society, has a singular fascination for the minds of many. Too late we learn that such ideals cannot be recalled, though the recollection of them may have a humanizing influence on other times. But the abstractions of philosophy are to most persons cold and vacant. They give light without warmth. They are like the full moon in the heavens when there are no stars appearing. Man cannot live thought alone. The world of sense is always breaking in upon them. They are far, for the most part, confined to a corner of earth and sea, but a little way beyond their own home or place or abode. They do not lift up their eyes to the hills. They are not awake when the dawn appears. But in Plato we have reached a height from which a man may look into the distance and behold the future of the world and of philosophy. The idea of the state and of the life of the philosopher, the idea of an education continuing to life and extending equally to both sexes, the idea of the unity and correlation of knowledge, the very good and immortal are the vacant forms of light on which Plato is seeking to fix the eye of mankind. Two other ideas, which never appeared to above the horizon in Greek philosophy, float before the minds of men in our own day. One sees more clearly than formerly, as though each year and each generation brought us nearer to some great change. The other almost in the same degree, retiring from view behind the laws of nature, as if oppressed by them, but still remaining a silent hope of we know not what hidden in the heart of man. The first alien is the future of the human race in this world. The second, the future of the individual in another. The first is the more perfect realization of our own present life. The second, the abdication of it. The one limited by experience, the other transcended it. Both both of them have been and are powerful motives of action. There are a few in whom they have taken the place of all earthly interests. The hope of the future for the human race at first sight seems to be the more disinterested, the hope of individual assistance the more egoistical of the two motives. But when men have learned to resolve their hope of the future either for themselves or for the world into the will of God, not will but thine, the difference between them falls away, and they may be allowed to make either of them the base of their lives according to their own individual character of temperament. There is as much faith in the willingness to work from an ancient future in this world as in another. Neither is it inconceivable that some rare nature may feel his duty to another generation or to another century almost as strongly as to his own, or that living always in the presence of God he may release another world as vividly as he does this. The greatest of all ideals may, or rather must be conceived by us under similitudes derived from human qualities, although sometimes, like the Jewish prophets, we may dash away these figures of speech and describe the nature of God only in negatives. These again by degrees acquire a positive meaning. It would be well if we meditating on the higher truths either of philosophy or religion, we sometimes substituted one form of expression for another, lest through the necessities of language we should become the slaves of mere words. There is a third ideal, not the same but akin to this, which has a place in the home and heart of every believer in the religion of Christ, and which men seem to find a nearer and more familiar truth, the divine man, the Son of Man, the Savior of mankind, who is the firstborn and head of the whole family in heaven and earth, in whom the divine and human, that which is without and that is within the range of our earthly faculties and indissolubly united. Neither is this divine form of goodness wholly separable from the ideal of the Christian Church, which is said in the New Testament to be His body, or at variance with those other images of good which Plato sets before us. We see Him in a figure only, or figures of speech we select but a few, and thus the simplest, to be the expression of Him. We behold Him in the picture, but He is not there. We gather up the fragments of His discourses, but neither do they represent Him as He truly was. His dwelling is neither in heaven nor earth, but in the heart of man. This is the image which Plato saw dimly in the distance, which, when existing among men, he called in the language of Homer the likeness of God, the likeness of another, which in all ages men have felt to be greater and better than themselves, in which in endless forms, whether derived from scripture of nature, from the witness of history of form, or from the human heart, regarded as a person or not as person, or with or without parts of passions, existing in space or not in space, is and will always continue to be the mankind, the idea of good, the republic.